Good afternoon. I'm a learner, burner, landowner, and I want to share with you some of my perspectives from a landowner perspective. And I consider myself much more of a forest steward than a tree farmer, because I have multiple objectives and probably value the ones of creating and maintaining on a landscape scale. I want a mosaic of different natural communities with different ages, different species, different management strategies that I use, and that includes both well-drained and poorly drained sites. So on the left-hand slide, you can, on the left-hand slide, you can see that I've got some longleaf with wiregrass understory and gopher tortoises, gorgeous property. But I also love the flatwoods where I've got cypress pond in the background, got a lot of gallberry and pitcher plants. So I've got a lot of natural diversity, and it's up to me to try to make that mosaic out of it. And of course, to pay for all my expensive hobbies of enjoying the property, I need to sell some timber to pay for it. So when we, as a landowner, we all know that it's going to cost us to burn. It's going to cost for labor, for equipment, for fuel. That's a cost that comes out of our pocket, and we don't grow more timber as a result. Not only does it cost us to do the burn, but occasionally we have escapes. Occasionally we'll have trees that die. And even if they don't die, we may have enough scorch that we're slowing the growth rates on them. And even if we don't have that, we may get some fire scars that are going to degrade the timber. And so we get less money for the timber we send to the mill. So there are negative impacts when we burn. However, a lot of people don't always think about some of the positive offsets are not as obvious. Now, if I'm lucky, about 1 year in 3, I get some cost share for my prescribed burning. I don't know what I do that I can't get it more often than that, but it's not always available. However, there are other indirect consequences. I want you to look at those two photos. On the right-hand side is a stand where I've been thinning and burning for 10 years. It looks absolutely gorgeous, doesn't it? On the left-hand side is what I started with, and that actually is a stand right across the road. Those two stands are opposite each other on a highway. So if you were a deer, which one of those sites would you prefer? And we already had a talk about that, didn't we? We would prefer, going to have a much higher carrying capacity for your wildlife, including your deer, with the right-hand stand than the left-hand. Not only that, but it's going to be more nutritious, so you're going to have better quality deer. They're going to be bigger and fatter and produce healthier babies. Now, if you're a hunter, which one of those stands would you prefer? You'd like the one on the right so you can see those deer. A lot of our hunters are there because they enjoy being in the woods and watching things happen. They can't see much happening on the left-hand stand. So you're going to get more money for your hunting leases if you maintain them looking like the one on the right. Then you want to sell your timber. If it's a thin, which stand would you want to go through and mark the trees to maximize your crop tree potential? The one on the right. If you're selling with a lump sum sealed bid for a clear cut, and people are going to want to come in and cruise your timber, which one of them are they going to want to work on? Well, it depends. If you're a landowner and you've got land like on the left, they're just going to drive down the road and they're going to eyeball it from a distance, aren't they? And if they do that, they're going to hedge their bets by giving you a low ball estimate. They're going to give you a low bid. You as a landlord are losing out because they can't get access into your stands. If you've got a stand like the one on the right, you can ride your ATV through there, no problem. I do it all the time, and you can get a much more accurate inventory, and you're going to get a much higher bid for your timber harvest. Now, there's another scenario. There's a hurricane comes through and everybody wants to sell their timber all at once for salvage before that blue stain fungus comes in. If you're a logger and you've got lots of people clamoring for you to come in, which one do you want? The one on the right. You're going to be able to sell your salvage timber. And another scenario is you want to do some clear cut and site prep. Which one is going to require more mechanical site preparation after you've clear cut? The one on the left. You're going to spend a lot of money doing site preparation if you've got a stand that looks like that. Whereas if I've been burning on a frequent basis, I don't have a lot of woody understory, and my site is almost ready to plant without doing anything. Well, very little anyway. Okay, so that's some of the things I wanted to share with you. I do a lot, as somebody referenced, with managing or trying to invasive plants on my property. And I use the integrated pest management that we talked about earlier. And that's a mix of methods to achieve my goals. And we all know that it costs less, even though it does cost, it costs less to use prescribed fire than it does to mow. And it costs less to mow than it does to use herbicide. So I use a mix and match. In this, the stand I had earlier with the longleaf or the wiregrass understory, my first burn went just wonderfully, and then I didn't burn often enough, and the stand started getting taken over by grapes. And sticking out of the top of those grapes was these beautiful, frilly little Japanese climbing fern that we heard about. And if you've got Japanese climbing fern, you need to get herbicide on all of the leaves if you have a hope in Hades of killing it. And so what I did, my very first growing season burn in August, scared stiff. I went in there and I ran a fire through there to remove the grapes. And about 6 weeks later, the climbing fern had regenerated with enough foliage so that I could see all those leaves, I could spray all those leaves, and the grapes hadn't come back out yet. So it was a great way of exposing the climbing fern so that I could kill it. Once I left it, I still wasn't burning often enough. I was still learning. I got the stand that's in the photo there, and the blackberries underneath, and the grapes drape over the top of it, and all the fuels. It looks so flammable, but there's no fuel on the ground. So the fire doesn't carry until it's a lot hotter than I particularly want it to be. So what I did in a case like that is I'd go around to these clumps of grapes and I'd mow them so that the fuel was now on the ground. And once it was on the ground and it dried out, then I could burn it. And then the next year I could spray the regrowth in a spot spray and get control of it. Okay, another thing I do is that I'm really do a lot with native plants. And here are two species that really like burning, and they need prescribed fire. Your wiregrass in the left photo needs a growing season burn or to get a higher percentage of mature fertile seeds to help regenerate and spread in your site. The other one that is even more demanding of fire is the pitcher plants. And they often grow in these gallberry riddled sites, and they need to have sunlight. If they don't have sunlight, they shrivel and get smaller and smaller, and you get these puny little dried up leaves, and they'll hang in there for a long time. But once you remove that cover over top of them, and fire is the best way of doing that, then they absolutely thrive, and they're plump and fresh and loads of leaves, and they're flowering and producing seeds, and wonderful. Okay, so another thing I do obviously is in my timber management is I'm going to be thinning. And I want to talk about some of how my desire to use prescribed fire influences my decision-making in forest management. And so this is a stand of loblolly that had never been burned. Young loblolly doesn't tolerate fire very well, so you want to keep the fire out. And by the time I took over management of it, it was a little bit past where it should have been thinned. And you had this dense woody understory and no grass. Well, I was beginning, and I waited till they did the thinning, and I said, oh ha, now's my chance. All that woody stuff is on the ground, and now I can burn it without it worrying about it scorching the canopy. Well, that was wonderful for that very first burn. Went fantastically. Second burn, it wouldn't carry. The trees were thinned out so much, there was not enough needles on the ground, and there was no grass, no herbaceous understory. It wouldn't burn. And so those shrubs were rapidly saying, I've got more light, I'm going to grow more, I'm going to grow fast. And so it started to take over the stand. As a result of that, I've changed my practice, and what I do now is on that first thin, if it looks like this, I tell my forestry consultant, I want you to leave enough trees on that stand that I'm going to have enough needles that I'm going to be able to get that second burn in there. And I'm going to be able to burn frequently enough that I'm going to knock back those woody shrubs and encourage the herbaceous plants to take over. So then by the second thinning, they can take out as many as they want as long as they leave me my crop trees. Here's site preparation. And I have two basic scenarios. One is if I've got poorly drained sites not suitable for longleaf, I'm going to be planting loblolly in those stands. And I know those loblolly don't like fire, and it's going to be at least a decade before I want to be using fire on that site. So I want to get a really good control of my hardwood shrubs and things before I plant my loblolly trees. And so I'm going to use a much heavier herbicide site preparation mix on those sites. On the other hand, no, I don't believe it. On the other hand, if I'm going to be planting for longleaf pine, I want to be burning early and often, and I need to be thinking about that fire carrying. And so what I'm going to do is try to retain as much of the herbaceous layer as I possibly can, and I use Nathan Klaus's recommendation, he's here somewhere, of Garlon Escort, so it's not killing those grasses. Okay, longleaf tolerates fire. And we all know that apical bud is protected in that grass stage. The recommendation out there is that you shouldn't be burning until those longleaf seedlings have a 1-inch crown diameter. Well, I'm going to test that, aren't I? And so after we did pine straw raking in a stand and retired it from that, there was a thick carpet of these baby longleaf on the ground, and I wanted to get in and burn it so that I could start some understory restoration. And I burned it right after they'd only just germinated, for goodness sakes. 6 months later, I hardly saw a single dead seedling, and I still had way more than I needed. So they are very tolerant of fire. I want to go through comparing my experience with different seasons of burning. And so in the dormant season, what happens is if you've got a herbaceous layer, it's all been frosted and desiccated, and it ignites easily and it burns quickly. Very flashy fuels. The flip side of that is that you're much more likely to get spotting. And I hate that spotting. If you get a spot with a head fire in a grassy understory, that will travel faster than I can on my ATV. But the fuel is really, really dry, so you can start burning it earlier in the day. And I can start by 9 o'clock, and I've got lots of hours in the day so that I can burn lots of acres. The other thing is, because it burns so easily, I can use backfires much more successfully. I just set that backfire and I sit back and watch it go. I let the fire do the work, and it just moves through the stand without me having to do very much at all. The big weather concerns is the concerns with spotting, low relative humidity, and strong winds. In contrast, in the growing season, I love growing season burns because those fuels are green. They've got a lot of moisture in them. They're not desiccated and dry. It takes a lot more energy to get them to ignite in the first place, because I've got to evaporate all that moisture off before they'll ignite. And that takes a lot of energy, so it is like a damper on your fuel and your fire intensity. And that means that often the moisture is higher in the day. I can't start my burns often until midday. And that means that I've got a shorter period of time to get my burns done. The other thing is that backfires often don't carry as well in a growing season burn. I use a lot more, I have to push the fire a lot more, spotting and stripping and things like that. So it takes a lot more work to do it then. My big concerns is atmospheric instability and high temperatures. I got caught in 2 downdrafts. I never want to do that again. And the reason why temperature matters so much is, if you think about burning in the dormant season, you're probably at around 50 degrees, whereas in the growing season, you're more like 90 degrees. If you look at those temperatures for what's going to scorch and kill your needles, you'll see that in the growing season burn, you're much closer to that lethal temperature than you are in the dormant season. So you're more likely to get some scorch in there. And there's another problem in that if you get severe scorch in your stand, if that burn was in February, you've only got to wait another month before you get new needles growing, and so the trees weren't stressed for very long. If you do burn in September, October, and they lose their needles, it's months before they get new needles. You've got a long period there where your trees are stressed and they're more susceptible to secondary influences. So if that severe scorch is on your hardwoods and your shrubs, or your loblollies in a longleaf stand, you're happy, but if it's your crop trees, you're not. Okay, very quickly, I hope I've got a minute. Okay, I'm trying to burn in these wetland areas. This map comes off, if you haven't got been accessing this, it's great. The bright green are wetlands. This is the US Fish and Wildlife Site. And they're bordered by my uplands, which are planted pines. So I want to get fire into those wetlands for wildlife habitat and many, many other good wildlife kinds of reasons. The challenge is to get them to burn in the wetlands, it needs to be very dry. And I don't want the fires to escape into my surrounding pine stands. So the uplands shouldn't be burned if it's dry enough to get into your wetlands. So what I'm trying to do in working with Jacob, I saw Jacob here, DNR, is that I went in early spring and I burned all of the uplands, all of the area that's not bright green, for fuel reduction, so that I've basically created a huge black line around those wetlands. And then when the wetlands dry out enough, I'm going to go in and burn those wetlands, if they ever dry out, and if I can get a burn permit. Problem is, I tried to get a burn permit, and GFC, going by their prescription, said to me, it's too dry for any sane person to be burning. We're not going to give you a permit. That was the only time I could have burned. Okay. So last thing I want to say is that those fire breaks, when I started, I had GFC putting fire breaks all the way around my stands because I was scared stiff of escapes, right? And they did what they have to do, which is go down to the mineral soil. When you've got gallberries, that means you've got a trench, and that trench has got berms on the side, and it holds water, so I can no longer go around there with my ATV to monitor the boundary of my burn site, and the animals get trapped in there and can't get out, so it's really bad for your wildlife. So what I'm trying to do now is fill those trenches in. I call them moats, and I fill them in, and I'm not disking them, I'm not refreshing them. If you can do without fire breaks, it lets the fire creep into those wetlands, and at the time you should be burning your pine stands, it should be wet enough in those wetlands that it goes in, but it's not going to go forever. You can't guarantee it, and I've got anecdotes on that too. But you've got real concerns. If it's these wetlands are on your boundary, is it going to come out the other side and get onto my neighbor's property? If it comes out and gets onto my property, bonus acres, except I'd be grossly negligent, wouldn't I? And the other problem is smoke management. If you get your fire in and peat starts smoldering, you've got smoke for days. And I had that one time too. So my bottom line is that the more you burn, the easier it is. The more you burn in your wetlands, the less peat you'll have, so the less smoke you'll have. So burn frequently and often. And if you've got multiple objectives, you need to be burning throughout the year, not just spreading the smoke, but for the health of and diversity of your ecosystems. Thank you.